Hi, I'm Dr. William. I'm an expert in fat, and not for the reasons that you might be saying. I'm an expert in fat because I do a lot of liposuction and I do a lot of fat grafting. So let me explain to you the difference between fat size and fat number. And what exactly am I talking about here? Okay, if we just picture somebody and we imagine, okay, all of the fat cells that this patient has in their whole body is represented here inside this rectangle. So these here, these little green things, these are fat cells. That's a fat cell. What exactly is a fat cell? Well, a fat cell is a structure in our body that is responsible for storing excess calories. There's other roles for fat, but I'm not going to get into those roles. But primarily, they store calories. So you have a fat cell here. If you're in a high calorie situation, which is basically every day that ends in Y for me, if you're in a high calorie situation, then what's going to happen is you have calories that are going to be ingested with your food. They are going to be absorbed and they're going to be stored in the fat cell. So that gets stored inside the fat cell here. It's basically oil, and those are the calories. When you're in a low calorie state, then what happens is that fat cell will start to shrink as it gives up its calories, the energy that your body needs to burn, and that fat cell will get smaller. So in high calorie, in situation, and when I mean high calorie, I really mean an excess calorie. So it's a balance between the food that you take in and the food you burn. If you're in a situation where you're taking more calories in than you're burning, you're in what we're calling a high calorie state or a surplus, an excess of calories. Those calories will be stored in the fat cells. When you're in a starvation state or in a situation where you're not consuming as many calories as you're burning, those fat cells will shrink. So that's what we're talking about when I'm talking about fat cell size, okay? That's different than fat cell number. So fat cell number is simply all the fat cells that you have in there, the number of fat cells that you have in there. Those are predetermined by birth, by your genes, as to how many fat cells you're going to have and where you're going to have them. What you do with those fat cells, whether they get bigger or they get smaller, depends on your calories. But the number is there. It's fixed. For this person, these are the number of fat cells that he or she has. Now, why am I even talking about fat cell number and size? Because it's important when it comes down to liposuction. So when we talk about liposuction, what we're actually doing is we are not changing the size. We don't have any effect on the size when we're doing lipo, but we do have effect on the cell number. And that's where liposuction comes into play. And so with liposuction, it's very much like you've taken away these fat cells. So these fat cells are removed from the body. So what you're going to have left is just going to be less fat cell number. So after you have lipo, using this kind of diagram, you're going to have this many fat cells left behind. So you're going to have fewer fat cells. And guess what? Your body doesn't make new fat cells. Only for the super morbidly obese does your body generate new fat cells. The rest of the time, it just either makes these fat cells grow or it makes them shrink. But it doesn't actually change the number of fat cells. That's a fixed number. So if this part has been removed with liposuction, you're left with this. So after lipo, you have fewer fat cells. Now, the same rules apply with calories. So these fat cells, even though they're smaller, they can get bigger and they can shrink. So the whole concept of having lipo and then the fat will then go somewhere else, it doesn't. This is fixed. We've removed the number of fat cells, they're gone. If you have calories coming in and calories being burned that are exactly the same rate, then you just stay in this situation. If you eat more calories than you burn, your fat cells are going to get bigger. You're never going to put this back. That's why the results of liposuction are permanent. When people say like, oh, lipo, it's just going to come back, or it's impossible. Those fat cells have been physically removed, thrown in medical waste. They're not there any longer. You can't store fat there anymore because they just don't exist. So the results are permanent.